Hello and welcome back to the channel. I am attira.kell and this is A Soldier's Opinion, the series where I apply my 19 years of experience in the military to the military professions of Star Citizen. Before we get started, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, as you will really help the channel out and maybe help us influence CIG to incorporate some of these realistic mechanics into the game we all love. Today we are talking about the mechanics of bombing. Now, before we get going, I have to give a big thank you to Salty Cactus and Juro for their help in capturing some footage for this video. Specifically, they went into DCS, which is a near-realistic flight simulator, and captured the flight profiles of various attack methods, so that I can show you the flight path of both the aircraft and the munition as a reference for what we should see in Star Citizen. Now, the way we're going to manage this is I'm going to run these bombing demonstrations throughout this video, and I'll link in the description where each one is in the video, and each will have a caption on screen to let you know what is going on with each bombing run. Now, I am a soldier, so I don't have a perfect handle on this in general. So, in addition to Salty and Juro, I reached out to a friend of mine who began his life in the military as an F-15C fighter jock and then transitioned to flying the B-2 bomber, which is of course the absolute pinnacle of stealth strategic bombing, and we spoke for around 2.5 hours on how we might best incorporate real bombing techniques into Star Citizen. This isn't meant to be a holistic discussion of everything on Earth related to bombing, but I think you'll find that there are a few things we discussed that are very easily brought into Star Citizen and might allow us to more accurately replicate bombing targets in real life. But before we get into some of the realities of bombing, let's quickly talk about when this should come to us in Star Citizen. According to the current roadmap, we can expect the A2 bombs, and as a result, the bombing mechanic in 3.15. Now, it seems like everyone is super stoked for the Trollmaster 9000, the A2, but we can certainly expect many other ships to be capable of dropping smaller bombs. If I were to theorycraft for a second, I would expect CIG to provide, at a minimum, S1 to S5 munitions on release, though I won't hazard a guess right now on whether they will be guided or unguided at this point. But either way, I expect a lot of smaller ships to be able to include smaller munitions into their loadouts and try their hands at bombing. And of course, the Moab, the mother of all bombs, is also planned for 315, which I'm sure will be considered an S10 bomb. But if I were to speculate, I would guess that all fighters with external pylons on the underside of the ship will likely gain the ability to drop bombs, though I could see CIG designating some craft as pure fighters and others as multi-role. We'll have to see where they go with that. For craft with an internal munitions capacity, I would expect any ship with an underside torpedo door to also double as a bomber. That means the Harbinger might carry variations from 3 S5 bombs to 24 S1 bombs, maybe. A Retaliator, which I have envisioned as a Star Citizen B-17, might live up to the role, with 2 massive internal bays full of bombs. But again, we'll have to see what CIG provides us with. So with that out of the way, let's dive into what I discussed with my Air Force compadre and learn a little bit about how we do this in real life and how we might see this realized in Star Citizen. The first thing we talked about was the types of targets he saw as a bomber pilot, and these really break down into 2 simple categories: planned targets and dynamic targets. Planned targets are those targets you know you want to strike when you are assigned the mission. Each of these targets is planned against with regard to type of munition, angle of attack, elevation, etc. These targets typically come with significant amounts of intel, way more than what CIG currently provides in mission briefings, which allows the pilot and crew to draw up a plan of attack. Dynamic targets are those time-sensitive targets that pop up once you're on the way to your objective. In these cases, the pilot and crew will plan against the requisite factors in the aircraft, even over the objective in some cases, so that they can deliver a weapon on target. Of course, in these cases, you might not have the preferred munition on board, but you use what you've got. It was during this early part of our conversation that he described an aircraft's ability to take multiple radar images of the target, and then match that against what special ops guys on the ground might have sent him. After further refining the target point, he could confidently drop a bomb where the operators were directing him to in the aircraft. The aircraft would then program the bomb just before it gets dropped out of the bay. After discussing target types, we moved on to discuss the considerations a pilot planning a mission must dig into for guided and unguided bombs. Let's start with unguided. The analogy he used was of a basketball player taking a shot. Specifically, whether the ball is going to successfully go into the hoop is determined at the moment of release, and there is nothing else you can add to it to affect it. What he was saying is that once a bomb is released from the aircraft, there is nothing you can do but hope you released it on time and that atmospheric conditions don't change the path of the bomb. Elevation and airspeed are other critical factors, especially when considering what is called a level delivery. For this specific mode of delivery, the aircraft should maintain a consistent altitude and speed. Within the strategic bomber community, this is the primary means of dropping munitions in almost all cases, but more on that later. Getting back to dropping munitions, the challenge with unguided munitions is that if you are 10 feet to the left or right, you likely will miss your target. Though if your target is very large, of course, you may simply hit off center. If your altitude is 100 feet above or below the planned drop altitude, your bomb will likely overshoot or fall short of your target. And this gets after our next challenge, which is what you would call your absolute altitude over the target. This requires you to know the elevation above sea level of the target as well as your own altitude over the target. This is planned and coordinated in the planning stages of the mission before you even get into the aircraft. The uncertainty of this type of bomb is why, of course, the US has moved mostly away from unguided munitions. But for Star Citizen, we might still find a role for these types of bombs. Certainly the question of altitude might be solved with planned future updates to how the ship sees its own altitude in relation to the ground, and that will be a good starting point. Another interesting fact we discussed is how carpet bombing is planned. Certainly this is rarely done today, but it does happen from time to time. He said for a run like this, where you are dropping 80 munitions over an area more or less in line, you select in your planning process which bomb in the line of 80 you want to be center on the target. Then, based on airspeed and altitude, the computer on board will kick out munitions both before and after the objective, with the selected bomb in theory being released to hit directly center on the target. Now, let's transition to talk about guided bombs. Right off the bat, I'll say that the US military almost exclusively uses guided munitions. It minimizes collateral damage by mostly ensuring that you are striking the target you want instead of anything around it. That said, my Air Force friend had much to say about the benefits of precision bombing. Right away, it's obvious that guidance removes many of the problems with regard to accuracy that unguided bombs face. Precision bombing allows the pilot to plan a variety of factors into the bomb to change the profile of both the approach vector and how the munition impacts the target. There are two primary ways to guide a bomb today. The first is by GPS. Program a latitude and longitude into the system and the bomb will guide to that set of coordinates. This is our most common guidance today and results in mostly a drop and forget profile. The second is laser designation. This laser can come from either the aircraft, or in our case spacecraft, or it can be provided from a soldier on the ground. Both of these methods allow the pilot to adjust the preferred angle of impact of the round. I took away the impression that a 90-degree impact, in other words perpendicular to the Earth's surface, is the most preferable impact angle. A 90-degree impact also completely removes the challenge of absolute altitude from the equation. The metaphor used was that of a car hitting a wall. If you drive your car into a brick wall at 45-degree angle, you're going to hurt yourself, in the car, and the wall. But if you hit it at a 90-degree angle, you're concentrating your kinetic energy more precisely into the destruction of the wall. You are not going to bounce off the wall at 90 degrees the way you might if you hit at a 30 or 45-degree angle. But it should be said that the ability to adjust the angle of impact for the round both in pre-planning and in the ship or plane allows the pilot to do things like put a bomb through a window in the side of a building. With regard to aircraft or spacecraft approach vector, with a guided munition you don't have to be directly over the target to hit the target. We spent a lot of time talking about how this works, but I'll give you the TLDR. Imagine that above every target you want to hit is a funnel. At the bottom of the funnel is your target. The top of the funnel represents all the acceptable points at which you can release the bomb. You can release your guided bomb anywhere within that funnel and the bomb will guide to the target. Left, right, before or after the target. And of course, the higher you are, the larger your funnel becomes, and the lower you are, the smaller the funnel becomes, meaning that acceptable points of release is determined by your altitude. Each guided bomb you drop has its own funnel, but to be clear, in reality, each funnel is actually a much more complex shape, but the concept of the funnel is valid. This is why I think we need a guild hall or some other type of location for mercenary, bounty hunting, and criminal work that offers us a way to plan these points on the ground at a terminal and then upload the coordinates into the ship. We could then fly out and execute the mission in a pre-planned fashion. Imagine flying over one of the turret-protected bunker missions, dropping 4 bombs on each turret. To quote my friend, the doors will open, all the bombs will fall out, they'll each go to their own place. It's a wonderful, beautiful thing. This of course leads us to player-driven reconnaissance missions that support player bombing missions. Reconnaissance was my first ASO video and I'll link that now, but very quickly we should be able to fly over a target with an in-game method of taking pictures, or what the military would call imagery. Take that footage, download it to a terminal where bomber pilots can access it, then they plan based on your imagery and go and execute the mission. Alright, back to bombers and bombing. Let's briefly talk about dynamic targets with guided bombs. Currently, within our strategic bomber capabilities, if a target is sent to the aircraft in flight, and is in range of course, the aircraft can take radar images of the target, geo-rectify it within the aircraft, drop a point on the target, and drop the bomb. The B-2 carries 80 500-pound bombs. On approach, the aircraft can look at the target, and the crew can identify additional targets they want to destroy. So, if an airfield only needs 60 bombs to render it inoperable, the crew can allocate the remaining 20 bombs to any aircraft or additional infrastructure that they feel needs to be destroyed. All on the fly. Now, let's move on to what we should see in the cockpit with regard to bombing. Right out the gate, I will say that I think CIG needs to give us a unique HUD mode for bombing. And you've probably figured out why as I have been showing you bombing techniques from DCS that Salty and Juro provided. Now, remember, my friend's point of view was from the B-2, so what we've been looking at throughout this video is DCS footage that highlights other ways to conduct bombing exclusively from the perspective of fighters. This is important because for large strategic aircraft like the B-2, they do not even have a HUD, so their bombing is managed through multifunction displays or MFDs. Of course, we are all familiar with MFDs, and I personally think that for our larger Retaliator and A2 type of vessels, this is where CIG should take us. For the B2, this manifests on the displays roughly as a ring over each target, almost like you're looking down at the top of a funnel. The number of bombs you launch determines the number of rings on the MFD. Your path of flight is shown by 2 parallel lines on the display. Your objective as the pilot is to stay within the lines, which will allow you to pass over where the most rings overlap. This allows you to drop the highest amount of munitions in one bay door opening as possible, minimizing your overall signature. Now, the image I am showing you is very rough, but you get the idea. The line on the left and right indicate the boundaries you need to stay within to successfully release all of your weapon systems. Now, this type of bombing is called CCRP, or Constantly Computed Release Point. This is used for precision-guided bombing and can be applied on an MFD, the way the B-2 does, or on a HUD as you have been seeing throughout this video. As we discussed earlier, this method of bombing allows you to drop to the left or right of the target, or before or after, as the weapon, as long as it is within the funnel, can guide itself to the target. For unguided bombing, we use CCIP, or Constantly Computed Impact Point. As our various footage has shown, this often presents on the HUD as a circle indicating where the munition will hit. HUD-based CCIP is typically for releasing 1 or 2 munitions at a time. However, when larger strategic bombers drop bombs in this way, they use the MFD. Given that strategic bombers typically drop large volumes of bombs in this manner, we are basically talking about what is commonly called carpet bombing. As we discussed earlier, the way this works is, during the planning phase, you decide which bomb in the payload of 80 will actually strike the target, understanding that all bombs dropped before and after the selected bomb will fall short or overshoot the target. Now, my friend had much to say on the usefulness of the HUD, and he did state he wished the B-2 had one, but he said that a HUD more or less is useless for high altitude bombing where the MFD is more or less king. But when engaging in low altitude support, or as we like to call it, close air support, the HUD's usefulness grows exponentially. Being able to see all relevant data to include altitude, attitude, as well as information for both a CCRP or CCIP drop at low altitude is critical, and so it becomes apparent that we should have an option or modifiable capability for both within Star Citizen. I hope we will see some ships from CIG able to do both, and others that will only be able to do one or the other. And of course, it would be fun if there were computer components we could swap in and out of our ships that allow us to adjust the ship's capabilities for a specific mission. Now, let's quickly talk about a couple of side discussions we had that present interesting challenges for gameplay. We briefly talked about how this image here is a poor approximation of what a pilot sees on his MFD. In the aircraft, as you adjust the angle of impact for the round, or in some other way restrict the flight path of the round, you can see these lines adjust in real time to ensure that the pilot has the correct flight path. This is important to ensure that the pilot can approach the target from the correct direction to achieve the desired effect. And this is important as we discuss ways to mitigate collateral damage. Earlier, we briefly discussed the idea of putting a bomb through a window, which of course would mean that the destructive force of the explosion would at least be a tiny bit contained within the walls of the building. Another way to mitigate collateral damage is the 90-degree impact we discussed earlier, as this helps us as pilots avoid what is called broaching. Broaching is when a bomb skips off the surface of the Earth like a rock skipping off of water. The lower your bomb's angle of impact, the more frequently this will occur. So you can imagine if an unguided bomb is dropped in a level delivery, it will have a fairly angular path to the target, which increases its probability of broaching, which in turn risks collateral damage when it detonates. Another benefit of that 90-degree flight path is that you are able typically to maximize the energy you deliver to the target. This is critical, especially when trying to dig someone out of a bunker, which is of course a task we in the Star Citizen community are all too familiar with. So for Star Citizen, how can we incorporate this? Well, we might expect to see bunker missions and other combat missions have a variety of desired outcomes. Maybe Hurston doesn't care about a specific old derelict bunker, and so you can drop a bomb on it to clear it out. But maybe instead, they want to reoccupy it, so you have to go in on foot and minimize damage to the structure. Maybe on ArcCorp there is a problem a good old-fashioned bombing can solve, but they want to avoid collateral damage on their city planet. So that restricts munition type, attack angles, and maybe altitude, any number of things. But hopefully you can see some possibilities. Regardless of the mission, how well you accomplish it determines the variable payout, which motivates players to do good planning. This also possibly opens the door for specific munitions for anti-vehicle, anti-personnel, or specifically for the destruction of structures, or very specifically designed to destroy underground structures. This type of thought process might also lead to some interesting targeting options, as perhaps we can drop bombs down shafts of bunkers or buildings to generate specific effects. Alright, we are driving towards the end here. I would be remiss if I didn't quickly mention the risk of a bomb jamming in the aircraft. The US Air Force calls this a stick. Now, this is a fairly rare occurrence today, so within Star Citizen, it should be exceptionally rare. So the last thing I asked my friend was if there was one or two quintessential things that kind of capture the idea of executing a bombing mission, and don't say trigonometry, what would those things be? He said, I would say that the ultimate tactic is mission planning. Painful, exquisite, detailed, integrated mission planning. Does the target need to be destroyed or rendered inoperative? Is the target defended or not? Where does the thing defending the target get its information? Is it separate nodes? Is there integrated air defense? Risk versus reward. Does the risk I want to take match the value of the target and the risk of the mission? Do I want to bring along EW? Do I want a fighter escort? What's their loiter time? What is the bomb load order? What type of bombs am I carrying? You are the planner of your own destiny. Now, with that, let's quickly sum up and roll through the things I think we need from CIG for the military profession of bomber pilot to be somewhat realistic based on everything we've talked about here. First, and I think this is more or less a guarantee, we need a vast assortment of bombs. We need unguided and guided munitions. We need both freefall, glide, and high drag munitions. We need at a minimum size 1 to 5 bombs. That said, I think CIG will certainly deliver in the diversity of bombs we can choose from. Second, all ships have HUDs, so we need a solid standalone HUD for bombing. Or more to the point, a bombing mode for each ship. Much like the various DCS clips I've dropped into this video, we need to be able to drop both CCIP and CCRP from the HUD. But I also think CIG should not skip on MFD capability. We should also be able to image a target, plan a guided munitions drop, and execute that drop all from the cockpit. Now that said, this MFD gameplay would also open the door for reconnaissance of targets ahead of time, which may lean more into PvP, but something I certainly think should be in the game. But that's in the cockpit, so we must still address planning outside of the cockpit. For that we need a terminal, more than likely based on how CIG's mechanics presently work, likely shaped like a table. To make this work, CIG will need to provide, as a part of the mission brief, an overhead image of the objective that can be imported to the table. From there, we should be able to plan the whole mission to include equipping our ships with the munitions we have in our inventories, and then, once complete, upload the flight plan into the ship you are taking for the mission. Finally, I think that CIG needs to account for variable levels of success depending on how effective the bomb strike is. This would require a fair amount of balance to get right with regard to missions and payout, but I think in the long run it would encourage planning and skilled execution for those aspiring bomber pilots out there. And that's it! While I am sure that this first implementation of bombing will be a great deal of fun, I hope CIG might take some of the ideas discussed here and implement them down the road. I hope you enjoyed this discussion on where I would like to see CIG take our bombing profession within Star Citizen. And if you did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more. And if you were looking for someone to play Star Citizen with or some other games, come check out a.m.m.o. Links as always are in the description down below. Later!